All right, we are into the last page of the review packet, page 16, which starts at number 94. I will say this, I am not going to be doing videos for the remainder of packet 1, which I have not done a video for yet. And the reason I'm not going to be doing that is I've told you in class that the part 1 stuff that you need to worry about is the extended and constructed response, which I have already shared out on YouTube. Everything else on packet 1 is nice material knowledge of stuff that will be on the final, but the questions are not worded like the questions on the final. You need to be focused on packet 2. That's why my focus on these videos has been packet 2. So on 94 and 95, these are examples of factor by grouping where we're asked to solve. So we're going to start by ignoring the equals 0 and factoring this trinomial. So 3 times 16 is 48. And I'm looking for numbers that add to 2. Negative 48. 3 times negative 16 is negative 48. And I want numbers that multiply to 2. That would be 8 and negative 6. So I'm going to break up that middle term into a negative 6h and a positive h8. h8, wow. Positive 8h. Now remember that this still equals 0, but we're ignoring that. We're not worried about the equals 0 right now. We're going to group the first two and group the second two, and we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. The first set of parentheses, I can take out a 3h, which would leave h minus 2. Second set of parentheses, I can take out an 8, which would leave h minus 2. That still equals 0, but I'm still not dealing with that yet. I need to finish factoring first. So my first factor is h minus 2. And my second factor is what's in front of the parentheses, 3h plus 8. So that would be fully factored as h minus 2 and 3h plus 8. Now I apply the zero factor theorem. H minus 2 equals 0, or 3h plus 8 equals 0, and I solve. Now if I had to factor by grouping, I should get one answer that's a fraction. So the first one, when I add 2 to each side, I get the answer h equals 2. And that is the first solution. Or, second equation, I'm going to subtract 8 from each side, which would give me 3h equals negative 8. Then I'm going to divide by 3, and that will give me h equals negative 8/3. So those would be my two answers to that question. I know it says to check the solutions. If you want to plug those back in and confirm that I'm right, go for it. But I'm always right, so you're good to go. All right. On this number 95, it doesn't equal 0 yet, so we can't start the problem until it equals 0. So we want to move the y and the 9 to the left side before we start. That would give us the equation 9y squared minus 16y minus 4 equals 0. So 9 times negative 4 is negative 36. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 36 and add to negative 16. That would be negative 18 and positive 2. So I'm going to break that middle term up into a negative 18y and a positive 2y. Again, I'm breaking that middle term up into two separate terms. Now I'm going to group and do greatest common factor. So I can take a 9y out of the first set of parentheses, leaving y minus 2, and I can take a 2 out of the second equation, or second set of parentheses, leaving y minus 2. That makes my factors what's on the inside, y minus 2, times what's left on the outside, 9y plus 2. That equals 0. I'm going to break that into two separate equations, just like I did before. And I'm going to solve each of those equations. I'm going to add 2 to each side. Gives me my first answer of y equals 2. And on the second one, I'm going to subtract 2 from each side, which would give me 9y equals negative 2. And then divide by 9, which would give me y equals negative 2/9. Okay, number 96 says factor the polynomial if possible. This is a special case. This is called the difference of two perfect squares. Anytime I have a perfect square minus another perfect square, That factors into the square root of the first term plus or minus the square root of the second term. So here, it's going to factor because k squared and 100 are both perfect squares. The square root of k squared is k, so the first term in each set of parentheses is k. One has a plus, one has a minus. The square root of 100 is 10. And on number 97, it does say solve by factoring, but I didn't see any other square root problems on the entire packet, so I'm going to actually solve it both ways. If we're solving by factoring, our first step is to subtract 81 from each side, which would give us 4y squared minus 81 equals 0, which means that factors difference of two perfect squares, like up above, into 2y plus 9 and 2y minus 9, which means I have 2y plus 9 equals 0 and 2y minus 9 equals 0. I would then solve each of those, and that would give me negative 9 halves and positive 9 halves, which is actually the long way to do this problem, because if we simply take that equation, 4y squared equals 81, it doesn't have a b term, which means we can solve this problem with square roots. We can divide each side by 4, which would give us that y squared is 81 fourths, and then we can take the square root of each side, which would give us that y equals plus or minus 9 halves, because when I take the square root of a fraction, that is the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom, and the square root of 81 is 9, and the square root of 4 is 2. So that would be the exact same answer. It doesn't matter which way you do it, unless the directions tell you to do it a certain way, and I don't believe they do on the final. Number 98 is a system of nonlinear equations, which means there could be more than one answer. In this case, this first problem is an obvious substitution problem because they're both equal to y. So we're going to plug x squared plus 5 in for y in the second equation, which would give us x squared plus 5 equals negative 2x plus 8. And then we need to move everything to the side with x squared. So we're going to add 2x to each side and subtract 8 from each side. That would give us x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. Then we have to decide whether or not that's factorable. So we need to think to ourselves, okay, I need numbers that multiply to negative 3 and add to positive 2. Well, that'd be 3 and negative 1. So this factors into an x plus 3 and an x minus 1. And that means that my solutions for x are given by x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 1 equals 0, which means my x values, and I haven't quite shown all of the work, are negative 3 and positive 1. Now I'm not done because this is a system, which means my answers are supposed to be points. So I told my students I want them to write this part out. If x equals, and list the first possible x value, negative 3, then y equals, and plug it in up here. So that would be negative 2 times negative 3 plus 8. That would be 6 plus 8, or 14. So my first answer is negative 3, 14. I'm then going to repeat those steps for the other x value. So if x equals 1, then y equals negative 2 times 1 plus 8, which would be negative 2 plus 8, or 6, meaning my second answer is 1, 6. Number 99. This is a circle and a line. So this is also a substitution problem. We are going to take x plus 4, and we're going to plug it in for y. Now this is going to be harder than the last one because of the squared. That will give us x squared plus the quantity x plus 4 squared equals 58. Now you're going to want to write x squared plus 16, but that is not correct. That is saying we are going to multiply x plus 4 times itself. So we're going to have to FOIL that out. X times x, so we have the x squared out front already. X times x is x squared. X times 4 is 4x. 4 times x is 4x. And 4 times 4 is 16. We are then going to combine like terms, which would be 2x squared plus 8x plus 16 equals 58. If I want to solve, I need that to equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 58 from each side, which would give me 2x squared plus 8x minus 42 equals 0. And then I'm going to see if that factors. Well, the first thing that it factors is everything there can be divided by 2. Now, if I do that to one side, I also have to do it to the other. But since the other side is a 0, that works out just fine. So that would be x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. So I'm looking for a pair of numbers that multiplies to negative 21 and adds to 4. That would be 7 and negative 3, which means this factors into x plus 7 and x minus 3 equals 0. Break that up. X plus 7 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0, which means my x answers are negative 7 and positive 3, because I would solve those equations. I then take those x values and I plug them in. So if x equals negative 7, then y is negative 7 plus 4, or negative 3, and my first answer is negative 7, negative 3. And if x equals 3, then y is 3 plus 4, or 7, which means I have the point 37 as my second answer. Final problem of the packet. We are finally there. It's been a long, crazy journey. Thank God this problem is super easy. Robin's neighborhood is mapped out on the graph below. Each unit on the map represents 1 mile. About how far apart are the park and the diner? So we find the park, we find the diner. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use Pythagorean Theorem to find that distance. So if you notice, we can draw a right triangle, and the distance is the hypotenuse of that right triangle. So we are then going to count the legs. This leg is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units. This leg is 1, 2, 3, 4 units. So essentially what we are doing in this problem is solving for the hypotenuse of a right triangle where the legs are 5 units and 4 units. We did some of these earlier in the packet, I believe, and if we didn't, there's plenty of them in the first packet. Remember that the rule is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we're going to do 5 squared plus 4 squared equals d squared. Okay, now, always put these numbers in parentheses. That will keep you from screwing up. So that's 25 plus 16 equals d squared, which means 41 equals d squared. Then we don't want d squared, we want d, so we take the square root. So d is the square root of 41, and we use our calculator to change that into a decimal because the problem says about. It doesn't say exactly, which actually makes sense because you don't often tell people, oh, I live root 41 miles away. So if we look at that decimal and we round it to the nearest tenth, that is about 6.4 miles, which is option C. That does it for the review packet, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know how many of these you watched, but I appreciate how hard you are working. Good luck on your final exam.